Good evening and welcome. I'm Bridget Globensky, Senior Director of Education and Programs at the Milwaukee Art Museum, and I want to thank everyone for attending this evening's program in conjunction with the exhibition Americans in Spain, Painting and Travel, 1820 to 1920. The exhibition is on view until October 3rd, so we just have 3 weeks remaining to enjoy these amazing works of art. I also want to offer my sincerest thanks to our exhibition sponsors. The exhibition is made possible in part by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities and by the Henry Luce Foundation, the national presenting sponsor. Our supporting sponsors include the Wyeth Foundation for American Art, the Milwaukee Art Museum's American Arts Society, the Tourist Office of Spain in Chicago, and our contributing sponsors are Christie's and the Gladys Kreibel Delmas Foundation. I want to extend a special thanks to the American Arts Society for their support in making possible this evening's program, as well as all the exhibition's educational programming. And I hope you'll join us for our next and last program in this series on Thursday, September 30th at a special time, 12 noon, Central Standard Time, for the virtual lecture, Spanish Golden Age Masters in American Collections by Akemi Luis Aedes Bosbrink, who is the Center for Spain in America Curatorial Fellow at the Meadows Museum. Spain has been a source of fascination for travelers and armchair tourists alike for 2 centuries now. And tonight's program is one critical to how many of us have engaged with the country through books and travel literature, and of course, in person. And we have 2 experts in Spanish travel joining us this evening to share how tourists experience Spain both then and now. Brandon Ruud, Abert Family Curator of American Art at the Milwaukee Art Museum and co-curator of Americans in Spain, needs no introduction to this audience. He will briefly share how 19th century travelers experienced the country. Then following Brandon, our marquee speaker, the savvy traveler himself, Rudy Maxa. Maxa is one of America's premier consumer travel experts. I first heard Rudy Maxa on NPR's evening business show, Marketplace, along with millions of listeners introduced to the savvy traveler. Today, Maxa hosts the #1 weekend travel talk radio show in the United States. He is also the Emmy Award-winning host and executive producer of the public television travel series, Rudy Maxa's World. In addition, Maxa is a contributing editor to the National Geographic Traveler, and his travel articles appear in the Washington Post, Forbes, GQ, Travel and Leisure, the LA Times, and dozens of other major publications around the world. Maxa will discuss travel in Spain today and reveal some of his favorite spots and hopefully his helpful hints for future travelers. This will be followed by a conversation and a brief Q&A. So now please join me in virtually welcoming our speakers this evening, Brandon Ruud and Rudy Maxa.
Thank you so much, Bridget. And again, thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm especially thrilled to be joined by Rudy. And I know you all can't wait to hear from him. But first, I'm going to give a very brief overview of what travel in Spain looked like in the 19th century to set some context. And as Bridget mentioned, travel in Spain was open to tourists and armchair tourists alike beginning in the early decades of the 19th century. And what really kicked this off was the plethora, of travel literature and images of the country that abounded, especially beginning in the 1830s. We could look to American authors like Washington Irving, a diplomat and writer who spent many years in Spain traveling and also had an extended residency in the Alhambra. or to popular travel guides at the time, like the one that you see here, highlighting much of Granada. And it was in this book, in fact, the David Roberts image, The Remains of the Old Bridge Across the Darro, from Thomas Roscoe's The Tourist in Spain, that first coined the word tourist to be used and applied to travelers in the country. And so with that, we can see that many of these travel books focused on Granada and the Alhambra as a premier tourist destination. And many artists and painters and, of course, travelers followed suit. You see above there the painting by David Roberts of the fortress of the Alhambra, an image that really set the tone for the majesty of the mountains, the grandeur of the Nasrid architecture in the Alhambra Palace complex. And then on the lower corner there, David Wilkie, a great friend of Washington Irving, showing him researching for his multi-volume book on Christopher Columbus in the archives of Seville. And this latter image almost acts like a promotion for tourism to Spain. The handsome, debonair, well-dressed, and educated young man of importance traveling to the country, accessing these archives, these unexpected places, buildings, and people, and really making Spain a must-stop on the grand tour of the country. And images like the one we saw by David Roberts of the Old Bridge, and paintings by American artist Samuel Coleman that you see at the right there, really highlighted the architecture and what was the perceived difference or expectation for the tourist in Spain, which is why Granada, and in particular the Alhambra, became so important. But this was also indebted to other artists, including Spanish artists like Joaquin Sorolla, who you see there on the left, his painting of the Hall of the Ambassadors, that front courtyard with the reflecting pool of the Alhambra, and then also Spanish artist Mariano Fortuny's Slaughter of the Abencerrajes. The Alhambra in Granada had a great reputation, one of legend, as the painting of the Abencerrajes shows us. According to legend, often retold in poems, operas, and in Washington Irving's own writings, a family vying for primacy in Nasrid, Granada, came into a rather precarious position when one member of the Abencerrajes tried to woo the daughter of the ruling dynasty and were slaughtered as a result, supposedly in the very halls of the Alhambra. And these popular legends really, again, set the tone for what people wanted to experience and expect. Not just the grand architecture, but the idea, the memory, the ghosts of these various legends. And it was Islamic Spain that really was an attraction for many of these tourists. You see on the right there, John Singer Sargent. His painting, he titled Moorish Courtyard, is of the Casa del Chapis, which was a must-stop in every travel guide to the country. And you see it in its slightly shabbier condition there, but has been restored and is now part of the government of Granada, and also an archive, and is absolutely splendid to visit. Or you have paintings on the left by Edwin Lord Weeks, who traveled a little bit further off of the beaten path to Cordoba, where he depicted this very romantic and fanciful vision of the Mezquita, the mosque cathedral at Cordoba. And Granada, if you look at the registars in particular for the Alhambra, there were a trickle of tourists in the 1830s, 1840s, then spiking in the 1850s and 1860s to dozens and hundreds by the end of the century. So they stopped keeping the registers. So this was one place to experience all of the beauty of the architecture, the history, and primarily the past that so influenced tourists to that destination. But what were some of the other major stops in the 19th century for European and American tourists? Well, of course, the capital city, Madrid, and of course, to the Prado Museum. And you see here on the left, a photo from the archives of the Prado, where supposedly, according to their archival records, John Singer Sargent is in the Murillo Gallery making a copy of the Immaculate Conception of El Escorial, a painting that you see there on your right, and in the exhibition. And for artists who started coming to Spain in serious numbers in the 1860s and through the first decades of the 20th century, the Prado and Madrid were the first stops on their tour. The opportunity to view, study, and copy these great paintings in the Spanish royal collections and at the Prado Museum. And you see here then some of those copies that even Spanish artists were making as part of their education and study. On the left, a portrait of Queen Mariana, believed at the time to be by Velázquez, and then the copy by Sorolla, again in the center, and then Robert Henry, who made his very first copy in the Prado on his first trip to Spain, the full-length version that you see there. And this really was the launching point for many of these artists and their careers, and the first stop on their journeys through the country. And they took these lessons, the paintings they studied, in particular of Velázquez, and reinvented in their own visual style paintings back at home. You see on the left there, the Velázquez painting, Las Meninas, a detail at the Prado. And then how Thomas Eakins, even for decades after his trip to Spain, kind of imagined, reimagined, and channeled Velázquez in his painting of artist James Carroll Beckwith, similar to the great artist Velázquez, standing at the easel, palette, and brush in hand, painting a portrait of his own wife, very self-consciously acknowledging the Spanish Golden Age master, but again, reinventing it in this own language. So if Granada, if Madrid were two of the main stops, then what were some of the others? Well, Seville or Sevilla was another major one. And you see Mary Cassatt, who spent an extended period in the early 1870s studying in the city, holding her own studio, meeting people, and often painting portraits. But as a slight detour, you see here also a painting from the workshop of Goya, and below a William Merritt Chase, the antiquary shop. So what was another fascination for people to do in Spain? Well, much like it is today, I imagine that it was shopping. And the William Merritt Chase proves the point. You can see an eclectic mix of various different items for sale in the antiquary shop, to the extent that when critics saw the piece, they claimed it was a typical Spanish store or typical Spanish street corner, even though Chase had yet to set foot in Spain before he painted it. But many 19th century visitors to the country were shopping for art. There were still great Spanish artworks to be obtained, and the portrait of the Duke of Wellington by Goya was purchased in the early years of the 20th century by Luzine Havermeyer at the insistence of Mary Cassatt on one of their buying trips to the country. So we come full circle in that way, but also continuing to Sevilla, what was, according to much of the travel literature, the most important and popular tourist destination in all of Spain in the 19th century. It was the Royal Tobacco Factory of Seville. One you see here depicted by Walter Gay, and according to travel writers, a place in which some 5,000 women worked and rolled cigarettes and cigars. And if you've ever had the pleasure of visiting Seville and seeing the building, it is immense. And so you can honestly believe that 5,000 women were there rolling cigarettes in these cavernous halls. And it today is the University of Seville, and an absolutely amazing building to see. And you can see how travel guides, travel writers, and tourists acknowledged their visits to the Royal Tobacco Factory in guidebooks and travel narratives. Often here you see the women at work, but also the reason for women is because it was one in which they could care for infants and do domestic work along with production. But were there other places off the beaten path of Madrid, Granada, or Seville that artists went to? In some cases, yes. You see here a painting by Cincinnati-based artist Robert Frederick Bloom, who spent most of his time in Toledo, where he often sketched and painted people, but even perhaps more importantly, the hidden kind of courtyards and out-of-the-way buildings and architecture that he then turned into finished canvases when he came home. Occasionally, artists also visited Segovia, as did Ernest Lawson, but that was largely as a result of the outbreak of World War I, and Spain's neutrality led him to spend an extended time in that city, where he painted these brilliant and dazzling paintings like the one you see here. And in a very rare instance, you had artists who went to further afield places off the typical tourist path. In the case of Childe Hassam, he visited Ronda on his second trip to the country. But you see here on the right in the painting Church Procession, Spain, the small Mediterranean coastal town of Denia, one that many people did not visit then as now, but Hassam did because his first journey to the country was a long boat on the Mediterranean. And one of the major fascinations with visitors to the country, again, then as now, were the people. And these two paintings, on the left by John Singer Sargent and on the right by William Merritt Chase, of the same person, Carmencita, the Spanish dancer, were actually done in the United States during the dancer's tour of the country while she was in New York. But it was the dance, it was song, and it was in particular Spanish people and Spanish characters that were a source of fascination by the end of the 19th century and into the early 20th. And such is the case with Robert Henry, who, along with John Singer Sargent, vies for the most visits to the country of any American artist, 7 total for both of them. And you can see on his 1906 visit that Henry was engaged with the people of various different backgrounds and situations. In the center, he has the matador Felix Asiego, who he befriended. And then on the left and the right, the guitarist Ramon and his wife, Maria, and their infant Consuelo, all sitting for Henry, and Ramon and Maria doing so when Felix was unable to make his obligations. And this was the real focus of Henry's visits to the country. Staying in Madrid, he rarely ever ventured outside, occasionally once to Segovia, but it was the people and the opportunity to paint them and turn them into grand manner portraits like those he had visited in the Prado that was the real attraction for him. And finally, I'll end with this beautiful satirical sketch by Henry's wife, Marjorie Organ Henry, showing the artist seated there, smoking a cigar, lounging on the right with fellow artist Randall Davy. Henry often visited the country and Madrid specifically on study trips with colleagues, fellow painters, and primarily his students, introducing whole new generations to the country, its art, its culture, and to the city of Madrid. And I think that this sketch really points to one of the primary purposes of travel, and that is fun, that is relaxation, that is companionship, and that is friendship, and a reason why many of us still travel today. And with that, I am as excited as all of you to hear from Rudy Maxa. So please join me in welcoming Rudy. Rudy, please, and thank you.
Oh, thank you, Brandon. I can't tell you how delighted I am to be here with you all tonight and how relieved I am. And I'll tell you why I'm so relieved, because I think, gosh, maybe more than a year ago, my lecture agent called me and said, "You ever been to Spain?" And I said, "Yeah, I've been 5 or 6 times to Spain. Yeah. Did you go to any art museums?" I said, "I went to a lot of art museums." I said, "Great, because the Milwaukee Art Museum wants," and so we had a very brief chat. I said, "Fine, that calendar's wide open, it's fine." And then about a week later, I thought, we didn't really talk about what I'm going to talk about. So I called him. He said, "Oh, well, it's going to be a special exhibition on 19th century art in Spain." And then I began to get very, very nervous, because I'm not a 19th century guy, and I'm certainly not a curator like Brandon is. But then I talked to Brandon, I talked to Bridget, and I found out there's a curator named Brandon. He knows all about the 19th century stuff. And they said, "Tell us a little about what the situation is now for going to visit in Spain. How is COVID? How's tourism?" And then I thought, well, let me put together several possible one-week trips that people might want to think about as an itinerary. And so that's what I've done tonight. And I'm so delighted that Brandon, I would give anything to have lived in the 19th century and seen 5,000 women making cigarettes and cigars in one big room. I had no idea that happened. I didn't know that painting. In fact, I learned quite a bit from what Brandon said. At any rate, I've been asked to bring you 21st century Spain, particularly in light of COVID. I don't have an enormous amount of good news. I mean, the only good part about this virtual evening is that you can't shoot the messenger. I want to describe the current situation in Spain for you as it might apply to you and me as visitors. And then, as I said, I put together a few one-week possible tours with an emphasis on art, obviously, that you might want to consider if you do visit. First, the situation. Overall, it's been a pretty tough time for Spain. In 2019, Spain was the second most visited country in the world, with more than, well, almost 84 million visitors. Only France ranked higher with 7 million. The US, by the way, was in third place. But that was all pre-COVID. In 2020, the next year, the number of foreign visitors to Spain fell by 70% compared to 2019. And interestingly, things are even worse this year. From January to June of this year, visitors only numbered 5.4 million, 4 million total. And if Brandon would put up the slide, he's going to be my slide guy. I'll say slide. Here are the number of foreign visitors in the first half of 21. Brandon, if you'll put up that slide. Now, normally, most visitors to Spain come from the UK, but the UK was shut down. It had been shut down. You couldn't leave the UK. And nobody wanted the UK to come either because they were getting bad numbers. So you see, UK is a paltry 1.2 million. Look at the United States, 407,000. This is after 83 million people in 2019. Now, while these numbers clearly crushed the tourism industry in Spain, not everyone was unhappy, like the residents of Barcelona, for example. Barcelona has been wrestling for years with over-tourism. In early 2017, for example, the Barcelona government froze the number of beds for rent in the city, and that included Airbnbs and other homestay options. They also passed a law that froze the building of new hotels in certain popular neighborhoods. Here's the problem. 32 million visitors go to Barcelona every year, and only 8 million of them stay in hotels. And keep in mind, Barcelona has 1.6 million residents. Now, Barcelona shares this problem with other European cities, Dubrovnik in Croatia, Venice, Dublin, and Amsterdam, to name a few others. And for these cities, I can tell you, local residents, most of them, at least those who aren't in the tourism business, loved the sharp drop in visitors. They rediscovered their city centers. Souvenir shops shut down and local businesses opened. They could get reservations at their local residents. In late July, which was nearly a month ago, I visited the walled city of Dubrovnik in Croatia. It's my fifth visit there, I think, probably in the last 15 or 20 years. It was the first time I could walk down the streets without dodging other pedestrians. Here's what the streets look like. Can you show that slide, Brandon? Now, this is Dubrovnik. I shot this picture. Look at, you can actually shoot a cannon down some of these, particularly the narrow alleys. I took both those pictures. Why is there no one there? No cruise ships. Every day during prime tourist season, 2 or 3 huge cruise ships would set tens of thousands of passengers loose in the walled city. 805,000 of them in 2019. This is a city where only 3,000 people live, by the way. 8 years ago, Dubrovnik became a major film location for Game of Thrones. Tourism swelled. And in fact, even when I was there were Games of Thrones tours being led around town. But the number of cruise passengers in 2019, remember, was 805,000. Last year, 5,000. 5,000. Now, Croatia has negotiated fewer cruise ships for the future, as has Venice and as has Dublin. Amsterdam introduced a tourist tax aimed at cruise visitors. Spain and most of this Europe, Spain and most other cities in Europe that are overcrowded are trying to figure out a way to tax day trippers. They've added a tax onto hotels, but they really want to tax day trippers because so many come in town, use up services, garbage is collected and so on, and then they leave town. What does this mean to you and me? It means it's a great time to visit Spain and most other countries in Europe because there are so many fewer visitors. Once those cruise ships comes back, it'll be a different story. Spain was hard hit by COVID. A strict lockdown that began in the spring of 2020 was only lifted in the summer, and that didn't work. So last fall, a state of emergency was declared, and that was only lifted this past May 9th, May of this year, several months ago. I looked at the numbers for the last month, and fortunately, the graph for everything, deaths, amount of infections is going down, down, down. So I feel good about that, and Spain should as well. As of right now, Americans can visit Spain. You can go now by offering full proof of vaccination. But keep in mind that just last week, the European Union put the United States on its list of don't invite them countries. Now, that's not an incumbent rule on all the European countries. Each country of the European Union can decide what they want to do. Italy, for example, was only requiring proof of vaccination. Suddenly last week, they said, yeah, proof of vaccination plus 72 hours after you land, you got to prove you had a negative COVID test. So far, Spain still only requires a proof of vaccination and a completed health form before you fly. And here's where you'll find that health form. Can you show that slide, please, Brandon? There's the website for it. Keep in mind, you got to fill that out before you go. Give yourself plenty of time because they're going to have to send back to you a QR code that we will show in order to get on your flight. They're going to ask for your passport information. They want proof of your flight information and flights and where you'll be staying. So you fill that out, you'll get your QR code, and that, along with your CDC documentation of full vaccination, will get you in Spain with no problem. So generally speaking, why is Spain a great destination? Well, you probably know a lot of the reasons, and we'll get to the treasure trove of art in that country in a moment. But it's the differing topography of the country, I think, from the many beaches on its coastlines to the Pyrenees between Spain and France that beckon visitors. The cuisine and the wines are a draw. And I have to add, I think the lifestyle is too. Like many first-time visitors to Spain, the first time I went to a restaurant for dinner at 7 o'clock in the evening, the doors were locked, and somebody came and unlocked the door and said, "Why are you here?" I said, "Well, I'm hungry." And they said, "Well, it's not dinner time yet." 10 o'clock is still most common dinner time in most Spanish cities. And that's after you've visited a few tapas bars. And along with tapas, you can put the slide up if you'd like. Along with tapas, Spain is famous for paella, chorizo sausages, and the Iberian ham there on the right that comes from Spain's black pigs that eat a diet, many of them, that mainly includes a lot of corn. Acorn, not corn, acorns. In researching this talk, I found that the average pig can eat 15 to 20 pounds of acorns a day. That adds 2 pounds to their weight each day. Now, the Iberian ham folks, aware of the fat involved in ham, will tell you that eating these acorns produces for the ham an oleic acid that some say equals the health benefits of olive oil. I don't know, but it's a great marketing ploy. There's a very complicated classification system for Iberian pigs and the ham, because there are 4 different recognized reasons where the pigs are raised, but I will leave that for a whole nother lecture. Now, time was in Spain when most businesses closed down for a couple hours in the middle of a day for a siesta. That is less common these days, especially in the middle of big cities, but it's not uncommon. So don't be surprised if you want to go to a drugstore, even in Barcelona or Madrid, and find it closed for a couple hours in the middle of the day. But all that suggests a slower lifestyle than the American way, where lunch might still be eaten in minutes at a desk or in a cafeteria, or these days at your kitchen counter. Then lastly, there are the festivals, I'm sure you know about the running of the bulls in Pamplona, which is in the first week of July. Then there's that festival where people throw ripe tomatoes at others. It's called La Tomatino. Slide, please. It was canceled last year due to COVID, but anyone can participate. I have not and probably never will. The picture on the left makes for a pretty red picture, but I don't know that I want to be in that photograph. The picture on the right is of the festival called Las Fallas that's in mid-March when giant paper sculptures are marched through the streets of Valencia. On the last night, most of those sculptures, by the way, are burned in huge bonfires, which sort of reminiscent of our Burning Man kind of thing that goes on in the Utah desert. And Spain's version of Mardi Gras is called Carnival. It's before Lent and Holy Week. And almost every city with the word San or saint in its name, like San Sebastian, has a day or a week of festivities to acknowledge the saint that is the namesake for their city. As one writer noted, in Spain, the dead are more alive than the dead of any other country in the world. I have a feeling you don't need to talk to me a whole lot about why you should visit Spain, but I hope a few of the points I just mentioned might speak to your heart. Now, the reason we're talking about Spain tonight is in honor of its art. And what I've done is fashion a few possible trips, including at least 2 different destinations in each that can be easily accomplished in a week. And the first one is, slide please, Barcelona and Madrid. Thanks to the relatively new high-speed train connection between Barcelona, which is the capital of Spain's Catalonia region, and the country's capital of Madrid, you can do both cities efficiently in 6 days. I mean, 3 hours you can leave after breakfast, and 3 hours later be in lunch in the other city. In Barcelona, probably the most famous thing to see there is the Sagrada Familia, and we have a slide of it here, Brandon. This is one of Spain's most visited sites. I suspect everyone here tonight is familiar with this. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's the unfinished Roman Catholic minor basilica in downtown Barcelona. Now, another architect we've never heard of began construction of this church in 1882, but when he resigned a year later, a new guy came in, the Catalan architect Antoni Gaudi, and he married Gothic architecture with Art Nouveau, leading to what I think today resembles one of the most elaborate sand sculptures in the world. Gaudi worked on the church till he died in his mid-70s in 1926. He was killed when he was hit by a tram while crossing the street that's adjacent to the basilica on his nightly walk to the confessional. His life might have been saved if anyone had lifted a hand to help him, but he was, by that point, dressing very disheveled. He was unshaven, and he was taken to be a street bum by passersby, and they sort of gave him wide berth. By the time police figured out who he was and got him to a hospital, it was too late. He's buried in a crypt in the church, and the church was about a quarter completed at the time. It was supposed to be completed about 5 years from now. That was going to be in the honor of Gaudi's 100th birthday, but the Spanish Civil War and the destruction of many of his plans and models made that impossible. Construction was also halted due to COVID. A target date now for completion is 2030 or 2032. Visitors to the nave, the crypt, the museum, and the museum shop and 2 of the steeples are welcome. But if you want to enter either of the 2 steeples, you must buy ahead and book a ticket. Between May and October, book ahead several days. Tickets are available for booking online, so you can do that before you go. Barcelona is also dotted with homes and apartment buildings, also designed by Gaudi, as well as a park called Park Güell. It's a hillside park meant to replicate a commercially unsuccessful housing site. And like many of Gaudi's structures, it's dotted with colorful mosaic titles that decorate benches and walkways in other parts of the park. If you go to Barcelona with an interest in Gaudi, I would really suggest you visit 3 of his downtown apartment buildings that he designed with their wavy, curving facades, and in a couple of the cases, facades studded with colorful tiles. Now, 1 ticket will get you in all 3 buildings that, by the way, are still fully occupied by people in the apartments. Imagine living in a building designed by Gaudi in downtown Barcelona. You got a lot of people walking through your lobby, but still a pretty cool place to live. This is the most famous of the 3 houses. If you put up the slide, please. It's Gaudi's Casa Mila. Whoops, we're a little ahead. There it is. And you can go to the roof, which is famous for its 360-degree view of the city. And the so-called warriors, the structures that Gaudi put up there, it's called the Warrior Rooftop, making it one of the most unique rooftops of a residential building in Europe. Also, not to be missed in Barcelona, is Juan Miro's museum called the Juan Miro Foundation. There's a visual shot, probably of a model, but you get the idea of how extensive it is. And It is high on the hill above the city, and there's a funicular from downtown that will take you up to this, what I call a beautiful cathedral to modern art. Miro's museum is set amidst a giant urban park that offers plenty of walking through the woods opportunities. In fact, the museum would like you to, or suggests you can hike to the museum if you have the strength, time, and energy. All right. Then we go to Madrid. And we get on the Madrid and we head to the avenue of 4 museums that may contain the highest concentration of priceless art in all of Europe. The most famous of being the Prado, and this is the facade of the Prado you see here. The other 4 museums are listed there. I do not speak Spanish, although I looked up a lot of Spanish words here. I have never been able to quite pronounce the third one, the Thyssen-Bornemisza. I'm sure Brandon can do it, but there you go. Those are the names of the museums that are on the El Paso del Arte, the Boulevard of the Arts, and you could clearly spend at least 2 days covering that real estate. The Prado is not only one of the most visited sites in Europe, it's one of the most visited museums in the world. Even last year, with the low number of visitors due to COVID, it ranked as the 16th most visited art museum in the world. It has these, we can hear, good, I'm glad, thank you, have that slide up. The Prado has the world's most it has the largest collection of Spanish art, as you might expect, from the 12th century medieval works to the avant-garde movement of the earliest 20th century. Of course, there are the headline Spanish artists, including El Greco and Goya, which are represented with these 2 paintings here. But there are also works by Hieronymus I've been able to pronounce this for years. Let me see. Hieronymus Bosch with Rubens, Botticelli, Raphael, Correggio, and Titian art as well. You'll find Picasso's Guernica, the next slide coming up, in among the 20,000 words of, well, the art isn't there, but you'll find it in this museum. This is in the Reina Sophie's collection, as well as art by Miro, Dali, Dubuffet, Braque, Calder, and Magritte. You see 2 examples here of a Magritte and a Calder. So good reason to go to the other museums and not just do the Prado and say, I think I've seen it. All right, trip number 2, Balboa and San Sebastian. There are plenty of quick flights from either Madrid or Barcelona to Bilbao at less than about $100 round trip if you book ahead. And of course, you're going there to see the Guggenheim Museum Bilbao. Did I say Bilboa? Bilbao. It's a museum whose design is recognized worldwide, of course. The city contributed $100 million to visit it, by the way, because it wanted to give a facelift to a decrepit port area, and it certainly did in a big way. This is a design that, along with maybe the Opera House in Sydney, and of course the White House in Washington, that are among the most recognizable structures in the world. King Juan Carlos, the first of Spain, inaugurated the museum in 1997. Its swooping design is credited to Canadian artist-architect Frank Gehry, and as I said, it was an instant hit. Inside, you'll find works by Jeff Koons, Jenny Holzer, Mark Rothko, sculptures by Richard Serra. There's a Koons and a Serra. The building rests on 655 pilings driven into the clay bed of the city's river. And the titanium cladding that surrounds the building, or wraps the building, by the way, was laminated in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And while you're in Basque Country, I'd suggest taking a little time off to visit nearby San Sebastian on the Bay of Biscay. It's only about 20 kilometers from the French border near the Pyrenees. It's a city of festivals, music and film festivals, and lots of holiday celebrations. Now, I have a confession to make. I've never been there. But I talked at length with a friend of mine who has lived in Spain for many years. He lives in Barcelona. And I said, well, where would I go after? He says, I said, should I go across the border in France to, and he said, no, don't go over to Deauville in France. Go to San Sebastian. And I said, why? He said, Rudy, let me put it this way. San Sebastian has all the good food in the world. That's a big statement. And that's where all the Rioja wineries are in that region, by the way. So he says, it's like going back in time. He says, you feel like you should wear a white bathing suit to the beach and have Brill cream in your hair. He says, here's what you do. You spend the day at the beach, then you go to your hotel and shower and put on your summer linens, and you walk up the hill to the Gothic Quarter, and your evening consists of stopping at tiny bars, each that pours its own wine, only one wine, and only offers a single pincho. The pincho is like tapas in Barcelona. to go with that wine. So you have one Pincho and one glass of wine at one bar, then you go to the next one and the next one and the next one, and before you know it, you've actually had dinner, which is where the appetizer gets its name, Pincho, because it has spikes on it. A toothpick in it, and Pincho means spike in Spanish. So, as I said, your other option is to go across the border to Deauville if you really want to visit the past. But he certainly suggests San Sebastian. I'm not going to argue with him. Trip number 3, Barcelona to Dali country. Now, and also a perch town called Siurana. I don't know how you feel about Salvador Dali. I know a lot of people think of him more as a showman than an artist. Some appreciate him as a showman and as an artist. But you would be impressed by his museum, which is less than a 2-hour drive from Barcelona. You're also likely to be charmed by the house he lived in, which began as a tumble-down fishing hut that he bought in 1930 and kept adding onto over the course of 4 decades, like a kid gone crazy with a big Lego set. Here's a shot that show the slide of his home in Portligat. This is where he lived. Now, you can see it's quite a few structures built up a hill. Again, it started at a little fishing hut down there by the port, and he just kept adding on and adding on, as long as each room would have a window bringing in light from the port. That was his one insistence to the architect. Now, this Byzantine house is chock-a-block with memorabilia. There's some pictures of it on the right there, a picture of a room on the right. One of the very cool things in his studio, there's a slot in the floor. You know, he did a lot of big paintings. And most artists who do a lot of big paintings have a ladder somewhere nearby, and they get up and they do their paintings as you and I might. But he had a slot cut out of the floor, and he would have his big canvases all already mounted on a block, brought into the basement, and they had a lift that would slowly, at his command, bring the painting up into his studio. So he never had to leave his chair to paint, which I thought was pretty clever. That's his home in the town of Cadaqués, which is on the water there. And you do have to make reservations to go in, by the way, as you do to the Dali Theater Museum. Now, it's in the town of Figueres, which is about a 45-minute drive inland from Portligat, his home. This is one of the most entertaining museums I've ever been in my life. It's a fantasy. It's filled with 3-dimensional collages, holographic art, mechanical devices, optical illusions that Dali is so well known for incorporating into many of his paintings, and a room with furniture that, if looked at from a certain angle, looks like Mae West's face. It's that kind of museum. It's built on the site of a theater that fell into disrepair, but it's a theater that Dali went to as a kid, and it's a theater that hosted his first art exhibition or exhibit. Take your choice. Need some water. Sorry. Dali is, of course, buried there in the museum in a crypt designed by Dali. So, by the way, one note, the museum, according to the website, is closed until March 27th. So plan your trip for the spring if you must go to the museum. Now, when you've had enough of Dali, the next stop is about a 3-hour drive, partly along the coast to the town of Siurana. It was the last Moorish stronghold in Spain. Of course, you know that southern Spain almost touches Morocco. It's considered one of the most beautiful villages in Spain. And from its way up there, limestone perch in 1154, the Moors watched the approaching Christian army that was about to vanquish it. Legend has it that the Moorish queen leapt from this high cliff on her white horse to her death rather than be captured. I underline the word legend. Here's another shot of Siurana. Only a handful of people live there now. Maybe 20 or less, but the stone buildings endure, as you can see, as does a beautiful 12th century church. There's a cafe in town and multiple hiking paths, but some along, as you can see, these cliffside paths. Now, I have a fear of heights. And if you have a fear of heights like I do, you might want to avoid these paths, but there are plenty of other ones. And you're also, as a bonus, right in the middle of wine country, because this village overlooks Priorat. And you may know the Priorat wine. It's Spain's famous dry red wine that is loved worldwide. So you're in very special wine country with jaw-dropping topography, with those limestone cliffs, the Montserrat Mountains, and then, of course, these hillside vineyards. You can take a tour of vineyards. You can enjoy tasting with local companies. There's a company I would recommend because they're very good at doing very, very nice trips, very small, maybe 2 people, 3 people, a family. It's called cellartours.com. But if you book ahead, they can arrange a lunch in a vineyard and several tastings for you, and also a trip up to Siurana as well. Trip number 4, Alhambra and Cordoba. And you heard Brandon talk about the paintings of Alhambra and Cordoba as well. And maybe you're an old hand at visiting Spain and you've done Barcelona and Madrid, maybe even Dali's hometown and museum, and maybe also Bilbao. Maybe you haven't visited Alhambra. Alhambra is in the city of Granada in southern Spain. It's a less touristed, although there's plenty of tourists, but it's less touristed than Barcelona and Madrid. It would be a big miss because Alhambra's sprawling palace and gardens are shining examples of Moorish architecture. It was built by Muslims, if you want to go to the next slide, who ruled Spain from 1232 to 1942. It's nothing short of spectacular. It's 1 mile of walls, 30 towers covering 26 acres, but it's a leisurely stroll through the entire estate. That's too small a word for an estate. It's like a small town, but it is gorgeous. It was built by Muslims who ruled Spain from 1232 to 1492. Most of the art at Alhambra is to be found on its walls and ceilings with intricate tile work and carved stucco motifs with vivid colors. In the Palace of the Lions, in the Hall of Ambassadors, that was one of the paintings that Brandon showed you, paintings of life in the court were actually done on sheepskin and then attached directly to the ceiling. So don't miss the Palace of the Lions with inside the Hall of the Ambassadors. Then, since you're nearby, it's just a 2.5-hour drive to the Andalusian city of Cordoba, where you'll find the Great Mosque of Cordoba, or Mezquita, as Brandon pointed out. In the mid-18th century, well, this city was first founded by Romans way back in 1422 BC. Things went really well until 48 BC, when Julius Caesar slaughtered 20,000 residents for supporting an arch rival of his. In the mid-8th century, the Muslims captured and destroyed the city. It took 200 more years for the place to calm down and for the city's jewel, the Great Mosque of Cordoba, to be built. And that's why you go to Cordoba, to see this mosque. In its heyday in the late 8th century, it was one of the largest sacred buildings in the Islamic world, and it made Cordoba a major Islamic center for the world. The mosque is immense. It's got a column prayer hall, 850 columns, Byzantine mosaics, walls made of inland gold. Is that slide 25 or 26? If it's not 26, we got another one of the Great Mosque of Cordoba. Nope, that's the next shot. Sorry. Oops, do we have? Oh yeah, well, it's just another shot of the Great Hall there. You will find the city. Since 1236. The mosque has been a Christian church, and you'll see some modifications throughout, but the Moorish influence more than predominates, so it's really worth a visit. After visiting the Great Mosque, just as a little footnote, there is a great hammam outside, just outside the walls. It's not an old-fashioned one, even though it looks like it, but it was made in the 1980s, maybe in the 1990s. So it's a great place to go and beat the heat by having a great Turkish rub down. And one thing I want you to keep in mind when you're going through the Great Mosque and visiting Cordoba, that 1,000 years ago, Cordoba, Spain was the biggest city in the world with a population of almost 1 million people. Today, that population is closer than 300,000. Okay, those then are my 4 most, how am I doing on time? Ooh, I gotta go. My 4 most trips with heavy emphasis on art and architecture. Obviously, the possibilities are endless. I've made no mention of the Balearic Islands off the east coast of Spain in the Mediterranean. There they are. You probably know the names of the 2 of the islands, Ibiza and Mallorca. The third is a much quieter island, and it's the one I like best. It is called Menorca, up there in the upper right-hand corner. Ibiza gets all of the ink because of the tabloids, thanks to the celebrities and the late-night bacchanals there. Mallorca draws more tourists, mainly Brits. But if you're looking for a beach vacation with green, blue, translucent waters, any of the islands will do the trick. I went to Menorca myself for a week, all by myself for a week after a really bad breakup. See, that's the trouble with these virtual speeches. I can't hear the audience go, oh. Anyway, I just rented a car, drove the whole island with no agenda, and it pretty much did the trick. I would warn you that because a lot of Brits go to the island and they rent cars, that Brits, of course, are used to driving on the left side of the road, and in Spain it's the opposite. And Brits are used to a right side steering wheel, and ours are on the left there. So be careful. The drivers are said to be nuts. Now, listen, the only other cautionary tale I would give you about visiting Spain, let me just divert for a minute, is beware of pickpockets in Barcelona, particularly along the long main street downtown. That's mainly a pedestrian mall. You see it there on the left, called Las Ramblas. You won't be able to avoid Las Ramblas, nor should you. But its pickpockets there are legendary. And if you go to the market there, which is on the right, that's a shot looking from the inside of the market out. It's a great place to shop for fruits and vegetables, obviously, but they also have little eateries in there. So it's a great place to go for an informal lunch, which you should do. There are stalls with bar stools, and you can dine there, but keep your purses closed tightly in your wallets, in your pockets. Now, before I close, I feel that there's some other experienced travelers wondering why I haven't mentioned Spain's third largest city after Madrid and Barcelona. That would be Valencia on Spain's southeastern coast. Valencia is certainly a worthy city to visit. It just wasn't a city I could pair with an art destination. I'm sure there is somewhere there, but I didn't know it. It's got ferry service to the Balearic Islands, so it's a good place to fly into. So does Barcelona, by the way. It's about 12 miles of beach and has some of the best weather in Spain. They boast 300 sunny days a year. It's a 2,000-year-old city with an old town of cobblestone streets and colorfully painted houses. You can see a few of them on the right there. Some streets are even more brightly colored. And the Plaza of the Virgin on the right there, where the city's cathedral is located. It's a gorgeous, expansive space with peace and quiet, but it's surrounded by a lot of nice, quiet places to dine. The modern in Valencia is the bridges, and on the left, the Oceanographic Museum. Valencia's flat riverbed is spanned by bridges that the Spanish architect Santiago Calatrava created. You can see that beautiful one on the right. It's a breathtaking ensemble of structures that have become a magnet for aficionados of contemporary architecture everywhere. And La Oceanographique is Europe's largest oceanographic aquarium, and it's built in the shape of a water lily with buildings dedicated to different aquatic environments from the tropics to the North and South poles. It was designed by a Spanish-born architect named Felix Candela. He died in 2017 in North Carolina, by the way, but he spent much of his career in Mexico. He's famous for his reinforced concrete structures, distinguished by their really thin curved shells that are extremely strong and unusually economical to build. And you can see those thin curved shells right there. Valencia's art museum is the Museo de Bellas Artes, and it holds Spain's second largest art collection after the Prado. So you should be able to fill a couple of days there easily. It's housed in a 17th century convent, and by the way, it's free to visit. So I offer these add-ons, the Balearic Islands and Valencia, if you're fortunate enough to spend an extended period of time in Spain. Obviously, there are countless other lovely cities and villages, as well as countryside and mountain locations. As usual, Brandon was talking about books in the old days. Travelers now, we use the internet, and it's all there. So much there so that it can sometimes boggle your mind. But remember, in the southern tip of Spain, there's a little British outpost of a rock called Gibraltar. I wouldn't necessarily mention unless you want to stamp your passport with a Gibraltar stamp. But Morocco is just across the Strait of Gibraltar from Spain. In the northeast corner of Spain, there's the French border. Cross it, and you're on your way to Carcassonne, and that's only a 3-hour drive from Barcelona, or you can go to Marseille, Montpellier, Nimes, Avignon, even Provence. And of course, to the west is Portugal along the coast. So if you're going to Spain for longer than a week or so, you have options galore. And if you're going for more than a week, I envy you. Let me conclude by putting it this way. You won't go wrong visiting Spain. Go there for the art, go there for cuisine, go for those parks that I just showed, or that you just saw on the screen. It's well priced for visitors. The cruise ships aren't yet back in a big way, and enjoy the lack of crowds, but please don't try to crowd too many things into too short a time. Spain asks you to slow down and to savor the country. Take your time, linger over a glass of local wine and a few bites of town in a cafe. No one is going to rush you off your table. Service, in fact, can be quite slow at restaurants, and few restaurants expect your dinner to end in 2 hours. So those two parks I showed you are both in Barcelona. And I would suggest lingering, there they are, They're both in Barcelona, both available to the public. I would say linger an extra few minutes in the park, adopt an urban park, relax there for a couple hours and watch the passing parade. The Spanish live a lot of their lives outdoors, and with a Mediterranean climate, well, why wouldn't they? So in short, do things you often don't do in your hometown, which is slow down. You're on vacation. Let me leave you with a quote from the man who wrote Don Quixote. This is from Miguel de Cervantes, who said something that to me touches on the value of travel. This is a quote. He noted, "The one who reads a lot and who walks a lot, sees a lot and knows a lot." Thank you very much for having me with you this evening. I'm sorry I went a little over time, but I think we have about 15 minutes to chat and maybe take a few questions and answers. Feel free to subscribe to my newsletter. It's free there. I do it every week. It's very chatty and gossipy about what's going on with rules, visit COVID, and smart deals and smart places to go, and my favorite restaurants in various places. Just go to maxatours.com/newsletter. Okay, who are we bringing back in? Bridget or Brandon? Who's gonna helm this?
I think
Brandon.
To be me, Rudy, and I have to say thank you so much. That was fantastic, and I cannot wait to start traveling back to Spain again. And your pronunciation of Thyssen-Bornemisza was perfect.
You're kidding me. That word I've never had to speak it before tonight. And I went to how do you pronounce, but I couldn't find it in my notes quickly, so I faked it. That phrase, that word is paralyzing for years. I'll go, yeah, and then there's also that other one that sounds like a Hungarian place.
No, it was perfect. Great. Thank you so much. And we're starting to get some questions coming in from our audience. And as I take the opportunity and have a chance to look at a few of those, I'm going to start with one I have myself, because I was really struck. I don't know if this is something you can answer, but I was really struck by the discussion at the beginning about Barcelona and over tourism and the amount of people, just the sheer amount of people entering the city. And then your discussion about Granada and the Alhambra and encouraging people to go. Yes, it's heavily touristed. It's a popular destination, but not quite the way we might think it is when we think of Barcelona or some of these other cities. What do you think the reason for that is? If we look historically, again, 19th century, it was almost exclusively that little trajectory, Madrid, Granada,
and Alhambra,
Seville, and now it's almost exclusively the Balearic Islands. It is Barcelona.
Well, the islands are so popular because the Brits love to go there. I mean, it's basically a British encampment in the summer, and a lot of Spaniards avoid it. They have homes there. They rent condos there. I mean, the Brits not being able to go there this summer and last summer killed the economy there. So that explains the islands. I think what explains Madrid and Barcelona is air travel. They're big cities, and that's where most of the flights go to. Of course, you can fly to go see Alhambra, but I think most of the cruise ships, more of the cruise ships will stop in Barcelona, certainly not Madrid because it's inland, but will stop at Barcelona, then it will stop along the coast. But I think it's really all about air travel.
Thank you. Here's I think a really interesting question about traveling today, and it's something that also has historic resonance. And someone asked if you know of any groups from Spain who do the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, and especially at this time during COVID.
I don't know any organized groups, but I mean, I'm sure all you have to do is go to Google and type in. Now a friend of mine, the actor and travel writer Andrew McCartney, just finished, along with his son, the entire hike, and he posted every day. So if you go to his Instagram account, look for Andrew McCartney, not McCarthy, McCartney. I think it's McCartney, isn't it? Now I'm confusing myself. I mean, I've known him for 20 years. Andrew McCartney, I'm sure it is. If you look up Andrew McCartney, you can follow his day-to-day. It's funny because he does a picture of them on the path. And then he talks about the 4 things he and his son talked about that day. But now is a great time to go. I mean, it's a little cooler than it was last month. I would think next month would be even nicer. But I'm sure you would have no trouble finding guidebooks and plenty of companies. I would just hire the company when I get there. And you can hire them along the way too. But I have never done that walk because I've never had the luxury of time to do it. But when Andrew did, I hope to have Andrew. I do a webcast every 2 weeks with some travel figure, and I hope to have, I've written him and said, hey, when can you get him on the webcast? So I hope to have him on for an hour to talk about it.
And someone typed in that there is a website, apparently AmericanPilgrims.com. So hopefully that'll be a reference for people attending tonight who might be interested in that. A few other, our chief curator, Margaret Andera, has also let us know that it is Andrew McCarthy, and you can find him on Instagram.
Is it TH?
Yeah, that's what she says, Andrew McCarthy.
Well, I'm sure it's one of those things when the spotlight's on you, you go, wait a minute, I do have a McCartney. Oh, I know. I'm going to Dallas tomorrow to have dinner with Scott McCartney, who is he writes every Thursday, it's called The Middle Seat. He writes the airline travel column in the Wall Street Journal, and he's an old friend, and his name is Scott McCartney. And I always have to, I'm sorry, well, thank you that's a smart curator. It is Andrew McCarthy. I'm terrible now, McCarthy. He's not even going to come on my webcast now if he hears about this.
Oh, sheesh. Margaret's great. So yes, thank you,
Margaret.
Here's a question. This may be a bit more for me than you, though. Would also love to have your thoughts. And someone asked, was there a specific draw to Spain by Americans when really it was Paris and Rome that were the centers of art at the time? And my response to that would be that yes, Italy and certainly Paris, Rome, even London, and then certainly the academies in Germany were where many artists went for extended stay, where many and extended education, where many expatriate Americans spent most of their time, but they often then traveled to Spain quite frequently and more easily from those countries because the big draw was to go to the Prado, to go to Granada and the Alhambra, and especially as Spanish museums opened up and nationalized, and these paintings, particularly those by Velázquez and Murillo, had not been seen for many decades and centuries, were becoming more and more well known. The opportunity to go there, study, and copy and paint was such a huge attraction, but often not for the extended years-long stay that they did do in Rome or Paris. And I'm
just guessing, and Brandon, you and Margaret know better, but the affluent, particularly in London, when they would do their grand tour, I presume they included Spain. When they do their whole, after college, you do your grand tour for a year to become educated and cosmopolitan. And I have to presume Spain was on that tour, yeah?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. No, it's a great point, because in the 18th century, with the advent of the grand tour, it was to the continent for many English, so to France, to Italy, to Switzerland, but Spain was typically not on that list, and it was really these 19th century travelogues and narratives, and then again the opportunity to kind of show your elevated status by visiting the Prado, copying paintings at the Prado. Where by the 19th century it did become part of the grand tour. Yes, absolutely.
I'll be darned. I would have thought that would have been right there right along with Paris, and Rome, but okay.
Yeah. And another person asked, simply put, what about Toledo?
I know.
As you saw in my presentation,
I know.
Fairly rarely did artists at least go there for an extended period. Robert Frederick Bloom did, but that's about the extent of it. Joseph Pennell did the famous Bridget Alcantara, but I don't know if you had thoughts, Rudy, on.
No, I don't, Brandon, because I've never been there. I've just never been to Toledo, so I didn't. When you mentioned it during your opening presentation, I thought, well, there's another place I should have put in for just, these places. I get the short answer, I've never been to Toledo, but when I looked at the map of Spain, I thought, oh my gosh, how am I there's so many great places to go. So I'm sorry that I didn't include Toledo, but it's certainly on my list to go to.
Yeah. Someone wrote that Toledo has a beautiful Miro in one of the buildings. So there is, yes, an opportunity and a reason to go for that. Here's a practical question. Would you rent a car or rely on Spanish trains for longer self-directed multi-city tours?
Well, I mean, certainly take the train if you're going to just do Barcelona and Madrid. Take the high-speed train. That's a no-brainer. The train system isn't quite as elaborate as you might find in France or certainly Germany, but you can take trains. I have driven in Spain because I wanted to sort of set my own schedule going from the two Dali properties, or two properties, I guess it's the right word, properties. And then I wanted to go into wine country and places. And, the last time out in the wine country, there ain't no Uber, and probably not a lot of taxis either because they're smaller villages. So I wouldn't be hesitant about driving in Spain. The highways are very many. I certainly have driven from Spain to France and from France to Spain. I wouldn't hesitate renting a car at all.
Excellent. And I will just share a story that also having driven in Spain and in some of the smaller towns, it can be challenging. And we absolutely trashed the car to the extent that the bumper was hanging off by the end. And the rental agency didn't bat an eyelash. So if you do get into situations like that, it can turn out to be fine.
Well, make sure you're insured before you.
Exactly. That's wise. That's wise.
There are some narrow streets. I have actually, when we were doing a shoot in Barcelona, I did bash our car into the side of a parking garage downtown that was, I don't know, it was built for kids' cars. I don't know. But yeah, I've had that experience.
Yeah, be aware of small and narrow roads and parking spots.
Yeah.
And finally, here's a really great question. What city itinerary would you suggest for an El Greco fan?
You're asking me?
Well,
I'm certain there's plenty of El Greco along the avenue of museums in Prado. They're probably enough to keep you busy all week. I don't know. Is there Brandon, you would know, is there a museum in Spain that specializes in El Greco?
Well, yes, you mentioned, of course, the Prado. They have multiple galleries and amazing paintings.
Huge ones. Big ones.
Yes. Absolutely. So you'll definitely want to go there. Just outside of Madrid is El Escorial, and they have an absolutely beautiful and amazing El Greco. Toledo actually has several El Greco paintings in it, and those, staying pretty close to Madrid and following that tour path. Going from Madrid to Toledo, El Escorial, or some combination thereof, will give you a really superlative taste of El Greco.
All right, that cinches it. My next speech on Spain and art, Toledo's going in it.
There you go.
I will tell you, I don't know. I'm so glad Brandon was here, because when my lecture agent called me about this, did I say this in the beginning? I was going to, when he said, "Have you ever been to Spain?" Yeah, I said that at the beginning. I was thinking about whether to say that or not, but yeah, I'm definitely, Toledo's on the list. Thank you, Brandon, and thank you to the audience.
And thank you so much, Rudy. I don't know if there are any other questions coming in, or if we want to offer an opportunity for Bridget to ask a question.
Bridget, light yourself up there, Bridget.
The host has blocked my video, but I will. Oh, here we go. There we go. Here I am.
Hiya.
I was really struck by, Rudy, your answer about why Barcelona is so popular because of people flying in there. And Brandon, I remember one of our speakers who was talking about the expansion of the railroad is making some of those places that the artists visit so popular, that, it's sort of these modes of transportation that move people to also targets different locations. And I don't know anyway, I'm wondering, Brandon, if you can comment on that.
I can, from, again, the kind of historical, the 19th century perspective.
Right. That's what I mean.
Yeah, it was more, again, like with the nationalization of museums, the opening of museums, it was the completion of the railroad, much as in the United States, that really allowed a country, mountainous, in some cases rather rugged, that allowed additional travel to and through Spain. And the reason why more of these inland areas like Madrid, like Granada, like Seville, were touristed and visited. A famous story, of course, is about Mary Cassatt, who came over on train and had to ride in her own train car, a kind of segregated woman's car as travel as it was at the time. And so that's how she came through the country and ultimately arrived in Seville. And I think that coincided, of course, within the United States post-Civil War and great booms in wealth. And so this increased tourism first to get to Europe by boat and then to take the train through the country. So yes, the nationalization of that and the completion of railroad lines from different cities in the 19th century really led to a lot of that.
Wonderful. What I love about this before, like in the 19th century and today, is how it opened up the different places for us to visit when we go to Spain. And I'm so anxious now to go back and to go to places that I've missed last time I was there. So Rudy, thank you so much for being game. When you getting into something you weren't quite sure what it was about.
When 19th century art came up, I panicked. I was like, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
I think it was so interesting hearing about travel then and now, and it turned into being a program that I'm delighted we were able to offer our audience.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor. I'm sorry I couldn't come to Milwaukee and do it in person because I really didn't want to go to Summerfest. I thought I'm going to stay an extra day and check out Summerfest in the weekend. But I like Milwaukee so much. But I live in St. Paul, by the way. If the audience, I'm sort of close by. So, St. Paul, Minnesota, not St. Paul de Vence, Brandon.
Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. Rudy and Brandon, thank you so much for doing this program, and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank
Three
you.
more weeks for the exhibition, so come on down and check it out. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rudy.
Thank you.